Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are listening to, you are witnessing, you are watching humanity in the headlines. I am your host, Atiba Buchanan. I am joined, accompanied by my good man, my brother, my pal, my confidant, my compadre, my partner in crime, Mr. David Seaton. How are you, sir?
I was waiting for a few more synonyms.
I gotta
Chief.
Right. I gotta, give them week to week. I can't do all of them in one show.
One more. I'm really excited today.
Okay.
The royal wedding.
Oh.
I'm just kidding. I don't care. I don't care about that at all.
Never understood Americans' fascination with because you and I are both old enough to have witnessed all this with Diana. And I remember it was even that was a big deal. And I was like, okay, they're over there. Like, who cares? I guess, whatever. To each his own. But
I don't care.
It was, from what I saw, from what I did see, it was a beautiful celebration. And I'm happy for him.
Listen, I have a video of my wedding that I haven't watched.
That I believe.
So I have no, and not that I haven't watched my video of my wedding, because that's not any reflection on my relationship with my wife. Just saying, I haven't sat down and watched my own wedding video. Or what I look like watching. I was hyped to see it or DVR'd it. Go ahead and throw a comment.
Apparently, though, it was a pretty black wedding.
It was a black officiant.
Yeah, the black guy preached.
Right.
And it was a choir. They did sound good. They sang "Lean on Me." They sounded pretty good. I don't even like that song. That's how I know they sounded good.
That lets you know that Black culture has officially taken. See, that's the one funny thing about European culture, is that they always lag like 20 years behind,
if not 30.
They're singing "Lean on Me"
right
at a wedding in Europe. You'll see a commercial later on today or this weekend with somebody break dancing,
right,
trying to sell jeans or something. They always come in 20 years behind.
So, bro, we have a lot to talk about today. First of all, we definitely want to thank our audience. We want to thank everyone that's watching on Facebook Live.
Eric Stevens just said he was forced to watch it. I guess his wife made him watch it. Oh, that's cold.
That's unfortunate, because it was on at like 3 a.m. But nonetheless, we want to thank everyone that's watching. Whatever medium you're using, IntellectualRadio.com, YouTube, Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us. Feel free, good people, to share the show. Let's let everybody know what we're talking about today, Dave. We got a lot going on.
Two more comments. Amy Bell said that she did not watch it. She says she has a life.
Who said that?
Amy Bell.
Okay.
And my man Kenneth Leggett said he watched it, had some flavor in the wedding.
Right. That's what I keep hearing. Everybody was like raving at how black it was.
I'll never know.
I saw one tweet saying, this must be a black wedding because it's running too long.
Oh, that's cold. That's cold. It's true, right? It's cold. That's cold. That's not even right.
So nonetheless, we have a lot to talk about today, notwithstanding this wedding. Unfortunately, yet again, and to no one's surprise, there was another school shooting yesterday. Unfortunately, we lost 10 souls, 9 students, and a substitute teacher.
And 10 people injured.
As you would like to point out, Mr. Seaton, the shooter was taken into custody.
Without incident,
alive and well, despite exchanging gunfire.
Despite walking into the school in Texas on an 88-degree day with a trench coat, boots, and a duffel bag.
Which he was known to do, by the way. And that didn't raise any red flags. But we'll get to that. We just want to let you know what we're talking about right now. So that's going to be coming up later in the show. So we want to talk about the school shooting. I want to talk about the president's coarse language this week. Coarse coded, actually it's not even coded, language this week, and talking about immigration and referring to, as he would like to put it, specifically MS-13 gang members as being not even human or less than human or animals. So that's what he said. He called them animals.
And that's so unlike him.
Right.
He's usually so well-spoken and thoughtful and measured. And
you on fire today.
Just so anybody who's new, that was me being sarcastic.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about that and the dangerous implications of that type of language, in particular, coming from the highest office, not just in the land, but arguably in the world, and why that's important, and why we can have a problem with what he said, but still not be defending gang members or anyone that does anything criminal. So again, we have a lot to talk about, but coming up in just a moment, we're going to talk about and really break down for you, have a nice comprehensive conversation concerning the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the opening of the American embassy in Jerusalem or in Israel, and explain to you why that's a problem. And if you don't know, this is a great show to listen to today to find out. If you've been curious as to why there's been such a big deal, because understanding there have been 60 Israeli protesters that were killed that did not pose any real threat. And we have to talk about that today. So joining us in just a moment will be Professor Jennifer Lowenstein. She has a lot to say about that, and we are looking forward to having her on.
Anybody out there who's watching on Facebook, or if you're listening live, if you're a churchgoer, if you're a regular churchgoer, we'd love for you to hang out for this next segment on Israel and Palestine, because that's really what's driving all of this right now. It's politics on the surface, but behind the scenes, it's more religion, and more specifically, the American version of Christianity that's driving a lot of this. So, we're going to try and get into that. Please stay tuned. If you know anybody who's a churchgoer, who's like really pro-Israel, share the show. We want to get those people in this conversation.
So we're going to take a quick break. We do thank you for joining us. And when we come back, we will be joined by Professor Jennifer Lowenstein. Thank you for listening to Humanity in the Headlines on IntellectualRadio.com. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. So, Dave, let me just set this up a little bit. I saw, as the news rolled out on Monday morning, some people were celebrating the fact that there's an American embassy now in Israel and Jerusalem, and some people feel that it's going to inflame tensions. But whether you're for the American embassy being built, whether you're for or against it, what I'm not for, and what I do not understand, is, for lack of a better word, the slaughtering of protesters. And I'm not even going to say whether or not they were necessarily peaceful. We can argue different versions of the word peaceful, but I do know one word that is important is proportionate. So the question is, using live rounds, because most of these people were killed by Israeli snipers, and I think they killed over 5 dozen people, ranging from ages of 8 months to 51 years old. With that said, what was their response proportionate? And I just don't understand how you can kill 60 people who at best had rocks. So I was really taken aback, not at just the actions that were taken that day and killing these people, but I was also even more taken aback by the lack of care and concern in the media and in the world community about the loss of life and where that leaves us. So I wanted to have someone on today to help us understand this better and kind of give us a comprehensive discussion about it, because there's a lot going on there in the Trump administration, with Jared Kushner being a semi-ambassador to Israel, and supposed to be the person that's helping to negotiate the conflict. The son-in-law of the president. We definitely want to have a better understanding. Joining us today is Professor Jennifer Lowenstein. How are you today, ma'am?
I'm well.
We are excellent. Thank you so much. You're listening to Humanity in the Headlines, and you're with Atiba and my co-host David Seaton. And Professor Lowenstein has been on the show with us a couple of times in the past, even back in our We Hear Ya days. And she's joining us again today because we can always count on her, one, to answer the call, and two, to give our listeners some profound insight as to what is going on with this conflict. So again, thank you for joining us. So I'd like to ask you right off top, as this information was coming out on Monday, as you see the death toll begin to rise, what was your initial reaction to that?
My initial reaction was one of both shock and disappointment that after 70 years, the Palestinian issue is no closer to being resolved than it was over the last century. I mean, basically, Israel was founded in 1948, but there has been now over 100 years of conflict over that land because of modern Zionism. So when I saw these protests coming, this protest in the Gaza Strip called the Great March for Return, meaning the right to return for the Palestinian refugees, I kept saying, I have been an activist on this issue for 30 years, and I haven't seen anything improve in the Palestinian situation. In fact, I've seen a steady decline in conditions, and sometimes not so steady. It's very discouraging because you want to think that your efforts are bearing fruit. And I do think there are more people in the U.S. today than at any other time who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. Obviously, it's a small minority, but it's more than it was before. But the fact is, we're obviously not having the effect that we want to have, or the conditions wouldn't continually be getting worse. Just one other comment is that it's absolutely no surprise to me that the Israeli media and the American media portrayed this as Israel's right to self-defense against a terrorist organization called Hamas. Not only is that a twisted interpretation, it's an ideological line. If you talk to any pro-Israel activists today, or any of the politicians behind the latest move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, for that matter, and many scholars, you just get a pre-programmed response. Israel is defending itself. Israel has the right to defend, for self-defense. The terrorist organization Hamas organized this march. They say it wasn't peaceful. They say Israel exercised enormous restraint in not firing on unarmed civilians.
Well, not to cut you off, but now that you mentioned that,
I feel like I'm living in an absolutely Orwellian world.
Let me do this, Professor Lowenstein. I'd like to actually play a little bit of sound because you led us right up to that point. I want you to take a listen to this, and then get your comment on it. Hold on one second.
But let's remember that the Hamas terrorist organization has been inciting violence for years, long before the United States decided to move our embassy. No country in this chamber would act with more restraint than Israel has.
Now, that's Nikki Haley, our ambassador to the UN.
Yes, I remember hearing that and seeing it on the news.
Is she right?
Nauseating. No, of course not. She is absolutely nauseating, and she explains when she gives her interpretation of these events. And as I said, she has the same exact response that the public relations and media people who are pro-Israel have. I haven't heard anything different. It's because of Hamas. It's because it's violent. It's for Israel's security that they have to have a fence, and it's an act of self-defense. And these are Even, I would say, the vast majority of the countries in this world, including more and more the European countries, are starting to realize that these arguments are becoming less and less convincing.
Professor Lowenstein, this is David. Thank you for joining us today. I want to make a quick distinction. The definition of the word Jew is a member of the people and cultural community whose traditional religion is Judaism and who trace their origins through the ancient Hebrew people of Israel to Abraham. So if you use that definition of what it is, how you define a Jew, and then you look at the majority of the people who are in the present nation state of Israel who are of European descent, and then you look at all of the other people like Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump who say that they are Jews because they converted. But isn't the real crux of what's going on over there is that the Palestinians, they fit the denotative definition of the word Jew, and they are fighting for land against people who have converted to Judaism but are of European descent?
Well, that's a good question. One of the things that bothers me today is that Judaism, in my view, is no longer inseparable from a pro-Israel or a supportive Israel attitude. For me, that's the destruction of Judaism. It's not that it can't be revived in the future, but I have a hard time identifying myself as Jewish because now it almost automatically conjures up, okay, then you are anti-Palestinian. You think the state of Israel has a right to exist in peaceful and secure boundaries. I mean, my Judaism has nothing to do with Israel or Zionism.
So you're saying then you can be Jewish without necessarily being a Zionist?
Yes. In fact, I've been to the Middle East many times. I've lived in Lebanon. I've lived in the West Bank. I've lived in the Gaza Strip. I've lived in Jerusalem. I lived in Israel, in Tel Aviv. I've traveled to Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and this isn't, to make me sound knowledgeable. It's that whenever I've been overseas, I don't immediately announce to people that I'm Jewish, but as I get friends, I feel comfortable enough to say that. And as soon as they hear me say I am anti-Zionist, that I have nothing good to say about the state of Israel, I'm welcomed. People there they do make the distinction between Jews and Zionists. We don't understand that here in the West at all because of all of the conflation of all of these terms. And yes, the overwhelming number of Jews in Israel today are actually, or are the next generation of Jews who fled from Europe and who, by the way, most of them would have preferred to go to the United States, but we had our immigration barriers up, and went to Palestine as if this was an acceptable thing to do. Now, I'm not trying to minimize the Nazi Holocaust. That's a whole different subject.
Exactly.
But what I do want to stress is that any people who move en masse to another country and immediately declare it theirs, that's pretty difficult in the age of anti-colonialism. Palestine was never involved in the Second World War. Why put the consequences and the burden of what happened in Europe onto a people who had nothing to do with it? Why do they get punished?
Big surprise that the United States, who is the largest economy in the world today, by virtue of the fact that they took a land that was occupied by someone else, that they should support the colonialism of European Jews or Europeans going into Palestine. But I want to touch on something else that you said about how we're unable to navigate this subject here in the United States because we confuse the definition of Jew and Zionism. That really goes into the evangelical version of Christianity and their interpretation of the Bible and the last days prophecies that Armageddon, or the Battle of Armageddon, is going to begin in Israel. So that's why there's been this big push to get Jerusalem, or get the capital of Israel, moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, because you have all of these fundamentalist evangelical Christians here who believe that has to happen to usher in the second coming of Jesus. Talk about the danger of that interpretation, and if you could also comment that, at least in my understanding, that hasn't been the traditional interpretation of Christianity for the last 2,000 years. That's a recent event specific to this country.
Well, there have been people or groups in the past who were called Judeophiles, who did look at the Jews as God's chosen people, and actually, were very welcoming to Jews, but it hasn't by any means been the dominant attitude. When I think of what's happening today, I think what people have to understand is that originally the Israel-Palestine crisis, I don't like to call it a conflict because it's not a battle of equals. It's an occupier and an occupied. And many people have to understand that. What I wanted to say, though, is that why are the Palestinians paying the price of the Second World War? I asked that before. Why are Jews so incapable of separating their identity with Israel, from Israel? When is this going to be more evident to the American public? How long are we going to accept a media that presents only the Israeli side, especially as more and more people in this country become aware of what's happening? And it is happening. That, as I said, that awareness is growing. I have, when I look back 30 years ago, you couldn't even have a demonstration without having a massive police presence. It's not that bad anymore. But people, even in the past few weeks, watching the news, saw the U.S. Embassy opening, and then they saw pictures of the killings in Gaza. And it was actually the latter that dominated people's responses. It was almost, it seemed perverse to watch this colonial project underway, because Jerusalem can never be the capital of Israel as long as it is being illegally occupied. It can't possibly be. So the Americans can do everything they want, anything they want, to say that Jerusalem is the eternal, undivided capital of Israel, but under international law, it can't be. So I look at that and I say, okay, I wasn't terribly shocked that Netanyahu and Trump decided together, and I'm sure it was together along with Sheldon Adelson, that it was high time for the U.S. to put its embassy in Jerusalem and to declare Jerusalem the capital of Israel. That doesn't surprise me. And I think that's part of the point. All it does is expose the policies of the United States as they have been for at least the past 50 years. The U.S. has always sided with Israel. It has a long record of siding with Israel. Many people thought that it should have been the honest broker between Israel and the Palestinians, but its record is always pro-Israel. So now it's easier to say, look, the Americans can no longer be the mediators. And I think that's important.
Well, many are speculating that having this move with the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem now effectively ends the conversation about an effective two-state solution. Are you in that same mindset?
Well, yeah. I mean, for a long time, I considered the two-state solution a better option than one state, at least temporarily, because there's such a history of animosity there now that I can't imagine both people living in the same state peacefully. It's it's unimaginable to me, at least in the short term. Now I think the two-state solution is off the table, and the question is what's next. In the ideal world, what I would like to see is for Palestinians in the occupied territories and Palestinian Israelis to start demanding more civil rights, and that there was a huge civil rights movement, a nonviolent civil rights movement within Israel and the territories, trying to make the obvious point that this is not a democracy we're talking about. Israel is not a democracy until everybody it controls, everybody living within its boundaries, can be an equal citizen. You still have a slaveholder situation. It's an apartheid situation. So again, going back to the original point, we can do what we want in terms of Jerusalem. We can say it's Israel's capital, blah, blah, blah. It's under law, it's not. And it can't ever be.
As I'm listening to you talk about it, and as I'm continuing to think about it, it just kind of occurred to me because really when you start talking about the city of Jerusalem, you have three different people who are laying claims to that. You have the people who are the citizens of the present nation state of Israel who are saying that should be their capital. You've got the Palestinians who are saying no, that land belongs to them. But then you also have that Jerusalem is also a holy city to the Muslim faith. So you've got really these three different factions, for lack of a better word, who are arguing about this little piece of land or the city, and all of that they lay claims to that city because of their religion that goes back thousands of years, and that might sound abstract to the layperson, but I guess as being in the United States, and tell me if I'm wrong, it would be kind of equal to if the American Indians came out of, rose up and said, hey, Southern California belongs to us. And the Mexicans said, well, no, Southern California really belongs to us. And then the United States, as the colonializing the colonializing larger power, would say, well, no, California belongs to us because it's one of our 50 states. And you could very easily, if you put it in that kind of context, I think that it would be very easy or easier to understand how you could have this multi-generational war, for lack of a better word, over a piece of land.
Yeah, I mean, the whole conflict there, it's presented in the news in one way, and there's another reality to it. Essentially, Israel is an expansionist state. As early as its founding, even earlier, there was an attempt and a goal for the Zionists to create a state and in the following years expand their territory, and they have. And I wanted to go back to a point you mentioned before because it just slipped out of my mind when I was talking about something else, which is about the evangelical Christians. And I wanted to say the evangelical Christians can be people who are anti-Semitic. Because in their view, the second coming will not happen until there is an ingathering of the Jews in Palestine, in Israel. The object is to get all of the Jews in the world back to Israel, and then Armageddon will happen, second coming will happen, and any Jew that does not then accept Christ will just die, will burn in hell. So it's really not a very favorable attitude towards Judaism. It's a way of saying Christianity is the only right way. And you're right, that kind of Christianity doesn't jive with what I consider real Christianity. That happens so often, with religion. ISIS was no more Islamic than the evangelicals are Christian or Jewish fanatics who are trying to blow up the Dome of the Rock, that's not real Judaism. So why are we allied with these groups? It's what you call strange bedfellows. Both groups have it in their interest to have Jews in Israel, but ultimately they oppose each other. And in some ways, it's a pretty sick relationship.
Wow.
As you pointed out, when the opening ceremony for the embassy opened, one of the speakers, one of the pastors, was Pastor John Hagee. He's been known for a long time to be an anti-Semite who, in his evangelical beliefs, sees it as justifiable for Jews to return to Palestine, to hell with the Palestinians. They should be there. We want Jesus to come again, and the way we can count on that the most directly is for the Jews to get the Palestinians out of Palestine, and for Israel to be strictly a Jewish state.
It's funny.
They're not really good allies. One really wants the destruction of the other people. The evangelicals want Jews either to convert to Christianity or die. And these are people we're allied with. So you explain it. It's a political alliance between two people who are trying to maintain a colonial settler state in the Middle East, which ends up being an offshore U.S. military base more than anything else.
Exactly.
What's amazing as I hear you say that, Professor, this is Atiba. I'm thinking of a Pastor Hagee, as you mentioned him, and as you outline what their vision is. At the root of their vision is a white Jesus, not understanding that the whole time they're talking about they want Jesus to come back, that he was technically a Palestinian Jew.
And that's another thing that has always bothered me is this notion of the white Jesus, this very white colonial notion of what kind of person Jesus was. Everything that I've ever read in a Bible of Jesus speaking contradicts the way we are behaving in Israel today. I think if Jesus were to come back and take a stroll around Israel, Palestine, stay there a little bit, he would be absolutely horrified. He would look at people like Hagee's followers as being probably the worst possible group of people spreading his name, using his name. But that keeps happening. We're happy. Jews are happy to have these people as their allies because what it does is it gives it more legitimacy, more power, more regional dominance. And so that's what you have. It's a religious as well as a territorial issue now. And I want to state that in the beginning, it sounds like Genesis, in the beginning, this wasn't supposed to be a religious issue. Yes, there has always been the mention of Zion, the return to Zion within the Bible. But that's also very abstract. Jews lived in the diaspora for 2,000 years. In my view, that doesn't give them the right to say, well, 2,000 years ago we lived in Palestine, so you have to get out. I can't imagine any people anywhere being allowed to take over someone's country on the grounds that 2,000 years ago they lived there.
Wouldn't it be interesting using that dynamic? Wouldn't it be interesting if the American Indians were able to do that to Americans? I would imagine that we would have a very different response if the original inhabitants of this hemisphere were in a position of power that they could attempt to extricate the Americans.
Professor, before that you go, I'd like to actually get back to the people of Palestine for a moment. I have a list. I'm not going to read the list, but there's something from the list I want to read. But I do have a list of all the individuals that were killed. There were 3 that were unidentified, but I just want to highlight something. They have a list here, and this is on. Let me let you guys know what this is on Quartz. I want to say, yeah, it is. And they give you a list, quartz.com, and they give you a list of everyone. And they also give you their name and their age. So they list everyone in chronological order according to age. So I'm looking at, there was a 14-year-old killed. There was a 15-year-old killed. There were 4 16-year-olds killed.
There was an 8-month-old baby girl killed because she inhaled too much tear gas.
Yes.
And the other thing, I just want to say, the Israeli response, or the pro-Israel response, that this is somehow a legitimate issue of self-defense because Hamas organized it, it just falls flat. Hamas doesn't need to convince anybody in the Gaza Strip or the West Bank or Jerusalem or in the diaspora that I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
you were just saying that they don't need that Hamas doesn't need to convince anybody. They just
that's right. And also, so they don't need to convince anyone. This idea that people went to the fence in the thousands to protest because of Hamas, that's crazy, because everybody in Palestine would like Palestine or the Gaza Strip to return to Palestine. Secondly, whether or not Hamas had anything to do with this march, and it did to some extent, that doesn't make it okay to fire on unarmed civilians, whether they're Hamas sympathizers or Abbas sympathizers or non-politically oriented, protesters. There's no need to convince them to go protest. Hamas is an organization that I don't like, but it's certainly no more terrorist than Israel or the United States, which actually I think of as much more, as far greater terrorists and sponsors of terror in the world. So what if Hamas has something to do with this? Does that give us the right to kill anyone protesting peacefully? No, it doesn't. And I'm so surprised that is a question that people aren't coming back with when you hear this line, when you hear people say, well, this is self-defense. The Palestinians have no army, no navy, no air force. They have no up-to-date conventional weapons. They have no chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. They barely have enough electricity to last 4 to 5 hours a day. They're impoverished. There's close to a 60% rating of unemployment. And Israel, one of the most powerful states in the world, has to defend itself against this group of people. Doesn't that strike you as perverse?
It strikes me as what the majority has done in this world over the last few hundred years.
Yeah, as Dave and I are both African American, and as African Americans, I can tell you everything that you're saying sounds very familiar to us.
Well, I can imagine. I mean, and the other thing here, listen to this, and it really gets on my nerves. Whenever you watch a television news program in this country, and it talks about Israel, you have to have both sides represented when it comes on the news. What is this? When slavery was around, if modern journalists had been here, people would have been shocked if the journalist said, well, we need to have a balanced presentation here. We have to present the slave's point of view, but we also have to give equal time to the slaveholders. If people thought about it that way, they'd realize how absurd it is, not only to be not giving equal time to both groups, but to be giving the dominant attention to Israel and the Jews. That's like giving the dominant attention to an oppressor. How can that be? How can we be so blind as not to see that? There aren't both sides of the story. There's one story. Zionists came over, took over the land of Palestine, or you can say it was given to them by the British, who, by the way, had no business giving away land it didn't own, it didn't control. Even when Israel was, when the Balfour Declaration was decreed, the British had no authority to say that there should be a Jewish homeland in Palestine. They didn't even control the country yet. Or, they were the colonialists, but that's the point. The Palestinians weren't ever given a voice out of it altogether. And I actually think if the media could just get its hooks into some of these bizarre arguments that keep being set forth, if people could start to say, wait a minute, since when do we allow the oppressor to get its story in every single time something happens over there and blame the victim for it? Well, the Palestinians, they want their land back. Well, gee, that sounds like, they sure are, victims, right?
Well, it sounds like
they've been completely dispossessed. There is no right of return. There's no end to the occupation in sight. Jerusalem is a capital that is important to three faiths, as you said, in a very interesting commission back in 1919, after World War I. There was a commission called the King Crane Commission that went to Palestine and Lebanon and Syria to try to get public opinion. And back then, public opinion was that they didn't want a European group of people coming into Palestine and declaring it their homeland. So public opinion in the region has always been anti-Zionist. But this is never presented to us in the news. It's always, two sides of the story.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, and we have to end it here, but at the end of the day, I'll just say two things. As long as until we get to a point where if a white life and a brown life are viewed as equal, we're never going to get fair coverage in what's happening in Palestine. And even when we do, as long as the watcher doesn't believe that brown life has the same value as a white life, they're going to continue to be dismissive. And the last thing I'll say is that history is written by the victor. So
almost always, yeah. I just want to say one other thing. It's like when the Black Lives Matter was getting a lot of media attention on the news, there were people who were saying, why Black Lives Matter? All lives matter. And it just bothered me so much because it completely sidestepped the issue of our history of racism.
Well, that's what it was designed to do, was sidestep it. that was its intent purpose.
You're going to take us down an entirely whole other conversation.
Right.
Professor, thank you for joining us today. Please tell our watchers and our listeners how they can find you and follow your work.
Okay. I most of what I write is on Facebook right now. I'm moving and then my boxes are kind of scattered around. But if people want to read my most recent writing, it's on my Facebook account. I also write for Counterpunch and a number of other websites. I've got some information out in books. They look up my name, and I'm much more articulate then than I am on a Saturday morning where I woke up late. So
we appreciate you being here, and we appreciate you bringing your experience and your sagacity to the conversation. And I'm sure we're going to have another follow-up conversation because this situation that's going on in Israel and Palestine, I believe, is going to continue to degenerate. But we thank you for joining us.
It's not going to stop anytime soon. You're right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Yeah, we really appreciate her being on. And again, what I was trying to paint is just the picture of understanding. Like she said, Palestine and Israel are separate, but they are nowhere near equal. So when you have, 60 people killed, when you have thousands of people injured, they actually don't even have the infrastructure in Palestine medically to deal with all of that. So they expect the death toll to rise, not necessarily because they aren't treatable injuries, but because they don't have the infrastructure in place to help treat all those types of injuries.
Man, what's going on right now between Israel and Palestine is no different than what went on in this country. European colonialists came to this continent, found some people here, and when they wouldn't cooperate, when the Indians wouldn't cooperate and just voluntarily give the land, they came up with a marketing ploy, started calling them savages, started calling they're gonna, scalpers and all these other derogatory caricatures we have of American Indians. And then once the public sentiment was on their side based on that marketing campaign, they killed them. The ones they didn't kill
propaganda.
The ones they didn't kill disease, they outright killed. So it's the same thing that's going on over there. Again, it's just frustrating to see European colonialism insert itself in every corner of the globe. But what the professor said that was the most profound is that at the end of the day, the United States, there's a religious motivation because you have these fundamentalist in-world Christians in the Americas, but more importantly, having a European owned piece of land in the Middle East is about military. It's about having access to airspace and having access to airfields and being able to insert yourself. You don't have to worry about getting permission from Syria or whatever to fly over, because we can just go right in through Israel.
Exactly. So again, I hope that conversation was beneficial to everyone that again, kind of caught bits and pieces of it, but really couldn't put it together. There's still a ton of questions that we wanted to ask that we couldn't get to. We really didn't get a chance to go into the politics of the whole thing. Because that's a whole nother conversation. But like you said, we'll definitely continue to have this conversation in the future. We're going to take a quick break. We've got a few minutes left. When we come back, we discuss the shooting in Texas. She actually took me someplace I want to go to. So we'll be right back on Humanity in the Headlines on IntellectualRadio.com. We are back on Humanity in the Headlines. So, Dave, my friend, my brother, we have yet another shooting in another American school. We have another, what would qualify under our standards as a mass shooting. We have more loss of life of teenagers. And having a son that's going into his senior year kind of breaks my heart, because I don't know what I'd do if I got that call. So, I'm saying that to say that first and foremost, before we even get into this, my heart truly goes out to the families and friends of the people that were lost, because that's a hole, especially for parents and siblings, that will never be filled. I saw one of the parents of one of the Parkland teens that was killed on CNN last night, and he was just amazing. But he said, he wants to go and support the parents. He said, but all he can do is hug them. He said, because there's nothing you can say. He said, every morning he wakes up, he gets stabbed in the heart, because it's his child is gone. And every day he basically said it really doesn't get easier. and people don't want to deal with the reality of that. But when you have your child snatched from you at school, at what is conceivably the safest place for your child to be, for nonsensical gun violence, it really puts things into perspective. So I just had to get that off. I just kind of had to get that off my chest. It's tiresome, it is wearisome, and I'm just tired of it. Especially for the reasons that we have this happen. I'll give it a little bit of context. The number of school shootings that have happened in the year 2000 around the world: England, 0. Greece, 1. The Netherlands, 1. Spain, 1. India, 1. Argentina, 1. The United States, 213.
This year?
No, since 2000.
Since 2000.
Since 2000. 213. The next closest is South Africa at 5.
The thing that we really have to grasp our wrap our minds around, and we have to answer this as a country, I think, for once and for all. Either we're all Americans or we're not. When I say that, I mean if you allow poverty and gun violence and unemployment and when you allow those things to fester in one part of your country to one group of people, eventually it's going to spread. If you allow guns if you see guns in inner cities, or if you see guns among minorities, or you see guns among poor people, and you see those people killing each other, and you say, so what? Or you turn a blind eye, it's only a matter of time before those guns are going to go outside of the community and they're going to touch you. So when I say either we're all Americans, this problem is not going to be solved until we as Americans make a decision that we are going to prioritize life over profit. We've got to hold our politicians accountable, and we on the left who are in favor of more gun regulation, we have to speak as loudly as the pro-gun lobby. The NRA, they are unabashed about
unapologetic
about what they believe and what they espouse. And their tactic is always the same. You'll have an event that happened like yesterday. They'll wait a couple of days so that they can get their message together. And then they come out with a cohesive message. They get all of their supporters out there and nothing changes. And we really have to decide, like I said, for once and for all, if we're all Americans, either all of us are Americans or all of us are not. If we're going to be sad about the Parkland shooting or the shooting in Santa Fe, then we need to be equally sad when there's a shooting in Chicago or Baltimore or Detroit or St. Louis. Until we can treat every loss of life as equally important, this situation is never going to get solved.
So I'm going to go somewhere with this that you would normally go and just kind of talk about some of the hypocrisy that I've seen, because it's just been too much for me in the past 4 hours. So last night, one of the top rated shows on Fox, Tucker Carlson, he covered at the top of the hour, for his entire hour, he covered the shooting in Texas for 17 seconds. Do we know how long? Can we even imagine how long he would have covered the shooting if Abdullah pulled the trigger, if Tyrone pulled the trigger? But what's this guy's name? Dominic or
it was a Polish or Slavic name.
He's Greek.
Right. Something like that.
But he pulls the trigger. So it's a white guy killing a bunch of white people, 17 seconds. So, and this is what's funny. This is what I was talking about earlier with the professor. When you mentioned, the propaganda that was used against Native Americans. Just the other day, our president was talking about gang members, MS-13. And I'm not going to, I will give him the context. He wasn't talking about all Mexicans or all immigrants. He was talking about MS-13. And he said, they're animals. These people aren't even people, they're animals. And the problem with his statement to me, and then something like this always happens after he says something ultra ignorant. The problem with that is white people seem to be the only ones that are the arbiters of determining who's human and who's subhuman. And the minute that you're able to categorize a people or a group of people or persons as something less than human, especially as an animal or a savage, then whatever you do to control that group of people becomes acceptable. So now when we see American soldiers killing Mexican immigrants at the border like Israeli soldiers, they'll be able to say, well, what do you want us to do? They're animals. Once that becomes the common understood theme, then whatever you do is acceptable. And that's my problem with the language, because no matter how egregious a white person behaves or a group of white people behave, no one ever refers to them as an animal. Dylan Roof, the Charlotte shooter, killed 9 people and they took him to Burger King. Do you take your dog to Burger King?
I have not.
I don't take my dog to Burger King. But so the point is they didn't see him as an animal. They saw him as a person. No matter how
misguided,
right?
Mentally ill.
Some cop looked at him and said, he's not going to have a meal again for the rest of a meal as a free man for the rest of his life. And he felt sorry for him in that moment and said, we're going to take him to Burger King so he can at least go out with that.
Even this kid who did this shooting in Santa Fe, Texas yesterday, when they were talking about, if you listen to the narrative was always he was a loner and he got bullied a lot. A lot of people are, the reports we're getting is that he was just getting bullied all the time. So again, the narrative is immediately set up that, yeah, we're not excusing his behavior, but we're putting a predicate out there to at least explain or justify what might have been the catalyst. Hey, if no one was bullying him,
right,
then he would have never done this.
Right.
So the issue is not access to guns. The issue is not this person not having enough everyone in our generation. If you are a 70s baby or before, there was always a bully. Somewhere in your life, you experienced a bully. And we were more of the mindset in our generation that either you take that experience as a bully and you grow from it and you use that as a springboard to grow yourself or to mature. But if you didn't, if you became the kid that let the bully you all the time and you always gave me your lunch money, in our generation, we never attacked the bully. We took that as an opportunity to tell the person who was being bullied, stand up for yourself. And being able to stand up, if you're in high school and you can't stand up to a bully, what you gonna do on your job? What are you gonna do in life? Life is going to bully you,
right?
Eventually,
yep.
So this whole effeminized and I use that word specifically. This effeminized approach of, oh, we got to get rid of bullies and blah 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 blah. I think part of that effeminization of people in general, I believe, is contributing to these types of outcomes, because we're not giving kids the tools that they need to stand up to learn conflict resolution. That's all it is. Nobody's telling you to go out there and beat the person up who's beating you up and taking your lunch money, but every healthy person has to have some skill set in conflict resolution. That's a part of life.
Absolutely.
And that's why I think we're getting a lot of these conflicts, because we're not addressing the issue. We're not addressing the right issue.
Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Already,
bro. It is literally up against the hour. Time is against us. We do the best that we can to get as much information as we can as quickly as possible. But this is one of those days we could have done a 2-hour show. So we just want to go ahead and thank everyone on Facebook Live that joined us today. We definitely want to thank Professor Jennifer Lowenstein for joining us. There was an amazing conversation with her.
We had a lot of people check in at the end. Idalia Reyes, Catherine Moore, Fanny Walker. Thank you for watching us on Facebook, and please share the show.
We want to thank our producer, Mr. Breon Jones, and Mr. Earl Winfrey for this wonderful and blessed platform. We will see you next week on Humanity in the Headlines. Everybody take care.